So our next session and panel, which is moderated by Tracy Lee, CEO of This Thought Solutions, an amazing partner of ours. I'm sure you guys already know her. And it's entirely focused on this challenge. How do we convert the promise of a signed agreement into tangible value?
We've assembled an all-star cast of leaders, including Placona, Rebecca Denman, David Hansen, and Chris Apaliski, to discuss transforming static contracts into intelligent insights.
All right, so please join us in welcoming our distinguished panelists to the stage. Give them a big round.
Hi everybody, how's it going? You're all ready for the entire day. I'm so excited to be here. What a great event so far. It has been amazing. I'm so excited about the announcements, and I wanted to go ahead and introduce our panelists today. So we have Placona, who is the founder of DevRel Bridge. We have Rebecca Denman. She is VP of Product at Docusign. We have David Hansen, Platform Partnerships at Stripe, and then Chris Apaliski, who is the VP of Product Marketing at JP Morgan. Welcome. And my name is Tracy Lee. I'm the CEO of This Labs. We are a Docusign partner and professional integrators specializing in Docusign, IAM, and Maestro. So to start us off, Rebecca, what is happening today at Docusign? How does Docusign help convert the promise of a signed agreement into tangible value?
Yeah, so as you can see, we're obviously very much focused on agreement intelligence. And we think that it's really important that you think about not just that single agreement. Yeah, you can do agreement summarization, you can identify key terms, but we also realize that there's so much more to an agreement. When you think about it, the real value isn't just in understanding that single agreement, it's about understanding those intricate connections between agreements. And maybe also equally important, it's about understanding how that agreement got created, the generation process, the back and forths. That is where we think there's a lot of potential value in really bringing to life the value of agreements. Now, what Docusign is focused on is proactively highlighting and identifying when all of that agreement data is most valuable and actionable. This is empowering businesses to take action on that incredibly valuable agreement data. Now, many of us, when we think about a contract, again, we think about that single document, but really there's a wealth of information around that document that may not actually be in the document itself. It's maybe the business data on how you created the sales contract, negotiation information, maybe the reasons why we gave an exception, approvals. How about supporting documentation like tax forms, or even supporting information like payment details and ID verification information? That is why the business of agreements is so complex. So, to your question, what is Docusign doing about it? Well, you saw a lot of the great innovations that we had here already today, and it's being supported by two key investment areas. First is in our agreement AI engine, Iris, and also in, obviously, the intelligent agreement management platform. Now, Iris, it's powered by millions of agreement-only data points. And that's already driving a lot of these wonderful agreement insights and delivering features and solutions such as custom extractions in our intelligent repository known as Navigator. And then you have our IAM platform. It's about modularity, it's about components, it's about supporting the entire agreement journey. And when you marry that with Iris, our agreement intelligence, you have a platform that's finally ready to take on the complexity and the challenges that when it comes to dealing with agreements. In addition to those two core investments, the beautiful thing about IAM is that it is a platform that is designed for extensibility. It's designed to leverage our developer community and to support the nuances, the variations, the complexity of those agreement solutions. And we're doing that through connective solutions such as that MCP server and some of our agentic solutions. So we're super excited, as you can see today, to see how our developer communities are going to help us, bridge that whole agreement journey and turn that complexity into value. And one of those areas of many nuances is in the payment space. And David here is from Stripe, and I know that you've had some experience with the IAM platform. Love to hear some more about it.
Yeah, thanks for the great transition there, Rebecca.
Yeah, worked on that.
When I think about our two companies, I think they're more intrinsically linked than people might realize. And that whenever there's an agreement or a signed contract, that almost always means that there's going to be a payment at some point, whether that's immediately or down the road or some form of combination. Historically, we've been mainly focused with Docusign on that immediate aspect. Typically, you close a deal with a new customer, you send them a contract, but then you need to send an invoice out or you have some other custom billing flow, but there is ultimately a gap between when the customer says yes and when your business gets paid. So today, you can go into Docusign and actually collect payment right at the point of signature through our Stripe integration too. So that not only improves your cash flow, gives you more consistent revenue realization, and is just generally a better customer experience. And then hopefully it should boost conversions as well. But if I think about the whole agreement lifecycle, I think there's a lot more areas where payments or payments technology could potentially drive more value. Let's think of an example where someone's buying an HR software. Sales has just closed a deal, contract is signed, and now they pass that over to RevOps. RevOps needs to go through that contract. Perhaps they're using IAM or Iris to extract details, but still they need to enter that billing information separately. They need to provision seats in their software. They need to figure out if they're billing quarterly, monthly, annually, and ultimately set that all up. That's just a lot of links in the chain, and although I'm sure they have processes to do that, it's just more prone to error. Imagine instead if there was a world where when that agreement is signed, you could collect payment not only for immediate terms, maybe one-off costs, but set up a billing instance, set up your recurring revenue. So now, and also onboard the customer. So now you're actually having an agreement, not just drive value and money you're collecting immediately, but you're setting up recurring revenue and actually improving customer onboarding as well.
I love that. You all mentioned sort of the power of this is all powered by developers, right? Developers in connecting agreements to value. At this dot, we've seen this firsthand, building both in the Docusign App Center and the Stripe App Marketplace. And I think what's been most exciting is seeing how strong developer ecosystems like those from Docusign and Stripe really create real momentum for innovation and what's possible. It's also, David, you mentioned this idea of a lot of times the value represented in agreements is connected to revenue. And we have another FINS represented here on the panel. Chris, how does JP Morgan Payments define and measure this value?
I think it depends on who you would ask, right? If you talk to anybody of my business or sales counterparts, they're probably going to tell you revenue. I know you probably look at me and think, wow, there's a businessman, but I would tweak my thinking a little bit, especially working with developers, and I would look at it in terms of proper reconciliation. This sounds simple on the surface, but it's the core of a successful transaction to me, right? One that goes through, it has zero issues, it's reliable, it's secure, and all parties are happy whether you're accepting, managing, or sending money. There's little kind of facets of info that kind of go along with that as well. One of those I think is timing, and this is also important. So, say you had some kind of instance where there had to be, near real-time payments, or somebody had to work with instant availability of funds, a dev would have to know how to build that into their workflow so that it's something that's helping the success of the timing of the transaction, so nobody's wondering where their money is at the end of it. And then there's this other idea of security and then trust as well. Account validation, entity validation, those sort of things, which is, essentially making sure that, the people or the businesses are exactly who they say they are, everything's secure, and that, again, there are no issues there when you're looking at reconciliation of a transaction. I think these are important because you're not just trusting the individual, you know. You're like, Steve's a good guy, Steve sent me money, great. But it's like you're also trusting the bank and you're trusting the overall deal. And I think that segues into it. So, you know, we talk about things of like the art of the possible, but it's like this whole workflow, you know, where you have proper timing, and then you have proper validation, and then like the proper payment rails, and then of course what do you end up with, but a reconciled transaction at that moment.
Yeah. I love that perspective. You know, timing, trust, safety, those are all such real measures of success. And I love the idea that value doesn't always mean revenue as well. In some industries, the win is really about getting somebody on board faster, or verifying an identity, or securing digital assets. Marcos, you are right in that space. So how are developers helping organizations realize that kind of value?
Yeah, so we heard some like talks from the people in the fin space about like the real like revenue realization, but there's value outside of revenue as well. So on the HR space, for example, like with an HR context. So I come from the UK, and in the UK we have the UK's right to work verification, for example. And what that does is they promote compliance, they promote speed to productivity, and they also promote any kind of like risk mitigation. Like really what you're trying to do is you're trying to get someone on board faster, but also you want to create the right documentation, and you want to avoid any legal penalties or audits if that happens. But then there's also another example that I really like, and this is in the crypto space. So I worked in the crypto space for a little bit a few years back, and you know, when you talk about crypto custody, or when you talk about any kind of like treasury agreements, for example, you have things like multi-sig wallets, for example, where you get the authorizations. You have the custody terms, and also you have some times where multiple parties need to go and sign something to make sure that you can make that transfer of value, and that value isn't always a monetary value. Now, the agreement is not about revenue. In this case, the agreement is about just making that transition, and it's about preventing the authorized access, for example, but also leaving an auditable trail, which I really enjoy. Now, you know, the faster and the more reliably you can do this, the better. And also it gives confidence to everyone who's involved. But I think in both cases, what I do like on these examples is the agreement itself is the gatekeeper to value creation, not necessarily the value itself. And also, if you can, because you're now just using those, it promotes like, you know, it compounds, like that value starts compounding. So that's also super important.
I love that, seeing the agreement as a starting point for value creation instead of the end of a process.
Exactly.
That really shifts how we start thinking about these systems. We're seeing that same shift as system integrators for Docusign IM, where developers aren't just writing code, they're engineering automation that moves business forward the instant an agreement is made. Chris, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges in bridging the gap between the moment an agreement is executed and the value conversion?
So I think there's parallels between like when I'm talking about challenges and I'm also talking about providing value. Because if you can address your challenges and understand them, then what can you do but like build out solutions that help provide value for somebody and that kind of thing. So within these parallels, the first of this is timing, and you know, a dev needing to understand like what kind of payment rails or what kind of APIs they're going to string together to get like this ultimate solution. I think I need to take a step back though before I even go to that, and then look at like the industry. The financial industry in like fintech, this whole space is full of jargon, and it can be extremely complex, right? Coming from JP Morgan, where we're like, we're going to have an open developer platform. You know, let's have people, you know, have access and play around a sandbox, that kind of thing. you hear those cliches like built by developers for developers, and like the last thing we wanted was like built by bankers for developers, like. So we had to like take this complex industry and like present the information in like simple terms that everybody can understand. Because I don't think, and no shade to anybody if you did say this, but I don't think a lot of people are like, when I grow up, I want to be a payments developer. And that was like a thing that we had to like break the stigma, because you're accepting, managing, sending a payment, and what are you doing but like building this functionality within whatever your solution is. So you present this info in like simple, common terms, and then you look at the timing of like how somebody is going to string together these APIs. And this goes back to that whole trust and safety kind of idea where I was talking about like account validation services or entity validation. We measure this quantitatively through, hits through our documentation and what people are looking at and where they're spending their time, or we can even measure this qualitatively where, this is a challenge for business decision makers, tech decision makers, developers, all those traditional, marketing audience buckets kind of deal. And this is important because understanding these things can affect the timing of a transaction and then can affect, the satisfaction of the end user. So like thinking of it again in like some kind of hypothetical workflow and bringing it back to before where I was talking about real-time payments, say somebody needs, near real-time payment for a transaction, and a developer needs to understand like, okay, these are the payment rails that I need to focus on, and then there's, some sort of like security validation on the back end while all this is happening so that, all channels are secure and people are who they say they are. And if this was capped off, again, hypothetical, art of the possible, I'm sure JP Morgan Legal would want me to emphasize that, but like if this is capped off with like a signature or something of that nature, if all this work has been done on the back end, then that signature kind of ties it together. And if I really want to pat myself on the back to my first question, that results in a properly reconciled transaction, so everybody would be happy. So I think those are some challenges, and I think those are ways to think about those things and then overcome it.
Marcus, how are you seeing developers bridge that gap?
Yeah, I feel like developers are in this kind of like unique position where they can just collapse the time between the promise and the value. But also it starts with you, it starts with developers just treating every agreement as an executable workflow rather than like a PDF where you put a signature on. And I think the opportunity here is like, you get to build systems where verification and compliance happen around the same time. They happen in parallel rather than happening at the end, rather than happening afterwards. So like going back to what Chris mentioned, there's, you have bank account verification, for example. If developers can embed the identity flows into their API, using the APIs, for example, they can do things like AML checks, they can do identity verification, and they can do other things like wallet validation, for example. And imagine if all this just gets triggered for like an automated fulfillment. So it just happens, and it happens as part of the workflow. Now, this needs to be built in, and it needs to be baked in with the solution. And it comes with things like, if you introduce like immutable logs, for example, clear consent trails, and it's all within that solution. And also, this is where things like smart contracts are really helpful because they promote those kinds of triggers. Okay, and then there's the opportunity of AI. I feel like we didn't talk about AI enough today, so so that's where AI kind of like can accelerate everything. Okay, and AI can do things like do pre-validations. It can check things like mismatched addresses, for example. It can check for like incomplete fields. It can check for risky counterparties, for example, which I think is also really cool. But also it can auto classify the agreements, and it can route those agreements. So like once a signature hits, for example, you have AI-driven reconciliation. And I feel like the gap here disappears when developers stop thinking about the agreements as just documents, and they start thinking about them as like automated and intelligent workflows.
Marcos, I just want to add, I love the thought of considering this as like an executable workflow and not just a static agreement where you have to wait for the next steps, right?
Yeah.
And I mean that if you think about the IAM platform and what we've been working on, it is about providing that infrastructure to allow for the flexibility of customizing and putting in the right checks, balances, steps in order to execute that agreement and deliver the value at the right stages of the agreement journey, right? And I mean, you gave that example of like AI and data verification. And if you all want to see some of it, I'm sure there's Parsa, he'll be out there later on. He'll be showing data verification where we're using AI to do just that, is to actually check the stuff before it moves to the next stage. Like we saw in the demo that I think that Joanne did with Fiserv. I mean, it was brilliant. It was all these different components. There was validation real time as you go through it. And I think that that's really some of the power that we have here. This is a very extensible platform. And I'm really excited to see where everyone's going to take it.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely, as having built a few different apps in the Docusign App Center and knowing just so many different apps that are in the App Center, you all should be taking a look and just seeing the art of the possible. I mean, it's incredible sort of how you can automate so many different workflows. And we're all expanding what's possible for customers, which I think is amazing. David, Stripe is just such a great example of a strong developer communities. How can we set developers up for success together?
Yeah, it's a great question. Stripe has always been an API-first company from the get-go. And a big part of that has been our public documentation, or what we call Stripe Docs. The thought has always been that people should be able to build on Stripe on their own terms and then come to us and work with us when they're ready. So what that actually means is if you go into Stripe Docs, you can find any product we have. You can find full integration guides, real code examples, and then even APIs that you can test in the browser. So really just making sure that we're giving everyone the tools they need to actually start creating on our platform. But I think another aspect of that is you can't just put the information out there, you have to keep updating it. And what I mean by that is not just updating to the changes we make, but updating to the way people work. So one of the big initiatives we've done this year is if you go into any Stripe doc, you can actually copy it directly into an LLM now. So whether that's the full integration path or maybe a specific line of code, you can just pull that out, it's formatted, put that into Cursor or Claude, and have it in your code base much faster than you would have before. So just really being aware of adapting to how we can empower our partners and the people that are using Stripe today. And I think that speaks to maybe a broader strategy of just being modular. Allowing businesses to build payment workflows that reflect what they actually need to do and how they serve their customers. For example, a food delivery service is going to have a vastly different payment lifecycle than an agreement management platform, for example. There's ordering food, and then there's paying out drivers in restaurants. Opposed to agreement management, you're primarily concerned about your recurring revenue and your customers and custom billing terms. So just giving everyone the tools to actually build to that. Because what that's ultimately done for us is it's shown us, one, where we're strong. Two, we've learned new use cases that we're actually pretty good at that we hadn't even thought of before. It also tells us how we can continue to develop, too. So, when I look at all the investments Docusign has made in IAM and Maestro, I see a lot of similar patterns there. And so I'm super excited to see what everyone here builds on those platforms, because I know it's going to benefit Docusign, but I think it'll benefit us as partners as well.
I completely agree with that. And seeing the Docusign developer ecosystem just grow day after day, week after week, month after month, it's amazing to see what the next year will bring us. So let's go ahead and give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much.